What was that man doing there? This late, at this hour, the place wasn't open and there were zero cars on the road. I pulled into the little parking lot and parked. I stepped out and called Mark's phone again. The guy picked up. He spoke in a noticeably loud voice. Now I told him I was in the parking lot of the pub and he said he was as well. He said in almost a whisper, "I'll be right over," and he hung up. It was weirder in the moment than it sounds explaining it. I looked at the location on my phone to see if it was updating, but it seemed the location of Mark's phone was in the small patch of woods, about 200 feet long and 200 feet wide. I tried calling again and it went straight to voicemail. I looked around the whole parking lot but didn't see anyone. I was all alone, not even an occasional passing car. I looked to the woods when I heard something over the sound of the crickets, like someone's footsteps, and then I saw a man. It was him. He was standing just behind the tree line between the woods and the parking lot. He called to me, "Are you alone?" And the sight of him, only his upper body visible, it was freaky as hell. I called back, "No, why?" As I inched my way closer to my car, this was one gained red flag. He called back, "Who are you?" With I didn't answer that, I got in my car and drove back to base. I called my supervisor and told him Mark was missing and someone was hiding in a patch of woods with his phone. My supervisor told me he was with Mark at that moment. He told me to meet them at the small building by the flight line. I met with the two and told them once again what I witnessed. When tracking his phone, Mark told me what happened while off the base. He was approached by somebody outside of a 24/7 convenience store asking for a ride back to the base. Mark believed that he was actually in the Air Force at first and let him in the car. But as they were driving, the man asked Mark to pull over by the woods so he could pee real quick. Mark obeyed for some reason as Mark was pulled to the side of the road by the same small patch of woods. By Terrace Tavern, he wasn't paying attention for a minute and his door was opened by the man. Without a second to even react, the man was grabbing Mark's arms and squeezing them as he tried to pull him out of the car. Mark said he kicked at the man's groin area until he let go. He dropped his phone and it fell out of the car during the struggle, but as he was free, he drove the car away with the door still open at first. And next thing that happened was he went back to the base to talk with our supervisor. We of course called the police and all went to Towers Tavern to check if the man was still there. The location of Mark's phone was no longer popping up on the map. It's possible the man destroyed the phone. All we did was file a police report. Some people out there are actually crazy and dangerous. Who knows what he would have done to either of us if he had gotten us in the woods. During my days as a marine, I had many different jobs on site, but my least favorite was graveyard patrol. At one point, I was one of the few with the overnight graveyard patrol shift for a nearby Memorial Cemetery. As you would imagine, it was a pretty slow shift with not much going on, oddly enough. Even though the cemetery was in a remote location surrounded by dense forest on each side and I was working the literal graveyard shift, I found the job more relaxing than scary or unnerving. I would be the only one in the cemetery. My relief would come around 4 a.m., which would be the end of my shift. This had to have happened past 3 a.m., nearing the end of my shift. It was on this otherwise regular night that I was patrolling near the perimeter fence, where some of the older headstones were. I wasn't allowed to be on my phone. If I were to be called with my phone, I would be reprimanded, even though it was unlikely to be caught since there was no one else really around except for me. I tried my best to follow that rule, so it was just a lot of walking around and looking at the old headstones. But anyway, while patrolling past some of the older ones, I began to hear a woman humming. It was this very calming, soothing kind of humming, and the I wasn't calmed or soothed because nobody was supposed to be in the cemetery. So it was more so a cause for concern. I started following the sounds of the humming. It was coming from behind this intentionally planted line of thick trees with vines and brushes sprouting for the sides of them. Instead of walking around the long wall of trees, I squeezed through the vines and brushes to the other side, cutting myself in the process. As I struggled to mark it to the other side, the humming suddenly stopped. As quickly as it started, I was left alone to the silence once again. Not even the sound of a cricket. I walked closer to the edge of the memorial property by the woods near a few of the big mausoleum looking structures, and I could distinctly hear some kind of buzzing sound coming from one of them. I stepped up the three wide steps into the structure. The little door didn't have any kind of locks on it. I'd never been in any of these structures until this point, and I was incorrect in my assumption that they were mausoleums. I still don't know what the purpose of them were. Maybe some kind of memorial building for deceased veterans. In the cemetery, as I was inside that cold dark structure, I could actually feel the hairs on my arms begin to stand up as I got goosebumps for a reason. I wasn't sure of just yet that buzzing sound was coming from inside of the structure, but it almost seemed like it was coming from beneath my feet. I looked down to the wood floor, and there were tiny round holes in each plank of wood. It seemed big enough to look through, but way too dark down there to see what lay below the floorboards. I had an idea. I positioned my phone on the floorboard just right so that the flashlight would shoot light into the hole in the wood, and I would look through one of the other holes. I lay basically flat on the floor with my head pressed up to the wood. When I closed, I expected to see nothing at all, but I saw what appeared to be the top of a woman's head, and as if she knew I started looking immediately, she looked up at me through the hole. I only saw her face for maybe half a second before I fell backward and let out a blood-curdling scream. I sprinted back to the parking lot and called the guy who was supposed to relieve my soon, and I told him to meet me now. When he showed up, I tried to convince him that I was telling the truth about what I'd seen in that little building. He entertained me by coming with me into it, and I repeated what I did earlier with my phone flashlight. He looked through multiple holes but saw nothing. I had to check for myself, and he was right. It was just some small empty looking space underneath the structure. I spent the rest of the shift with him. I left at 4 on the dot. I know he didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. I'm sure it's a possibility that it was a hallucination as a result of my lack of sleep. But I also believe it's a possibility that I witnessed a spirit or something completely supernatural. I'd heard so many older Marines and veterans tell of supernatural experiences they had while serving. I don't know who the woman that I saw could have been if it truly wasn't my imagination, but it chills me to the bone of imagine it having been one of the women buried in the cemetery. You.